And now we've got to check in on Kamala Harris, the vice president and current presidential nominee for the Democratic Party, who just reaffirmed one of her old radical stances in a radio interview. She was asked about the filibuster, which, if you don't know, is a rule that requires most serious, impactful legislation to pass with 60 votes in the Senate, rather than a pure majority of just 51 votes out of 100 senators. The filibuster is meant to ensure that policies aren't flip-flopping every 2 years when the elections happen, and that serious consensus is required before large-scale systemic changes happen in our country. But in an interview with Wisconsin Public Radio, Kamala confirmed that she wants to do away with the filibuster in order to enact abortion rights nationwide. Take a listen.
It is well within our reach to hold on to the majority in the Senate and take back the House. And so I would also emphasize that while the presidential election is extremely important and dispositive of where we go moving forward, it also is about what we need to do to hold on to the Senate and win seats in the House. That being said, I've been very clear. I think we should eliminate the filibuster for Roe, and we need and get us to the point where 51 votes would be what we need to actually put back in law the protections for reproductive freedom and for the ability of every person and every woman to make decisions about their own body and not have their government tell them what to do.
So this isn't actually a new stance. Harris has said this for several years now, but it is interesting that she affirmed it rather than waffling or not responding as she has with many of her old radical positions now that she's the nominee and has tried to present herself as more moderate. This one she doubled down on and said, yep, I still want to do this. I still want to scrap the filibuster, so just in the Senate, pure majority rule, 51 votes is enough to pass this kind of serious legislation, changing national policies. And I think that's a huge mistake. I think she's totally wrong on the merits. And for a long time, even Democrats could see the importance and necessity of the Senate filibuster. For example, listen to former Senator Joe Biden explain why he supported it for such a long time.
President Lyndon Johnson, the master of the Senate, put it this way: in this country, a majority may govern, but it does not rule. The genius of our constitutional and representative government is the multitude of safeguards provided to protect minority interest. Proponents of the nuclear option argue this proposal is simply the latest iteration of a growing trend toward majoritarianism in the Senate. God save us from that fate if it is true. I strongly disagree. Even a cursory review of these previous changes in the Senate rule on unlimited debate show that these previous mechanisms to invoke cloture always respected minority rights. The nuclear option completely eviscerates minority rights. It is not simply to change in degree, but a change in kind. It is a discontinuous action that is a sea change, fundamentally restricting the Senate and what the Senate's all about.
So it's not too often that I say this, but Joe Biden was completely right. Kamala Harris is being incredibly short-sighted with this naive proposal, because if you just get rid of something like the Senate filibuster to enact your agenda, well, guess what? It's not going to be there in a few years where Republicans take power again and boom, they can do the same thing. They can change nationwide policies with just 51 votes in the Senate. And so while you may like it, and my position on this is totally independent of how you feel about abortion rights and how you feel about the whole debate over Roe v. Wade and all of that, whether you want Roe v. Wade codified at the federal level, set all of that aside for the purposes of this conversation. If Kamala Harris and the Democrats can enact Roe v. Wade nationwide with 51 votes, Republicans can take it away again with 51 votes, and they can do whatever else they want with just 51 votes. So once again, Democrats are being incredibly short-sighted with their political machinations where they undermine systemic checks and balances like the Senate filibuster in pursuit of short-term political gain, and then it's always going to come back to bite them. They're really weakening the things that will actually protect them and their interests when Republicans take power next. So I think it's totally misguided and deeply naive, and you actually have a pretty recent historical example that shows how this ends up backfiring for Democrats and in fact led to the very situation where Roe v. Wade was overturned in the first place. Back in 2013, Democrats were frustrated by the fact that Senate Republicans were blocking President Obama's judicial nominees because there was the filibuster in place for judicial nominees, meaning that you needed 60 votes to get judges approved. Harry Reid, then the Senate Majority Leader, decided to get rid of the judicial filibuster for all federal court positions below the Supreme Court. And then they were able to ram through the Obama nominees without the 60-vote threshold being met. But this opened the Pandora's box of eliminating filibuster protections so that when Trump took office, Senate Leader Mitch McConnell got rid of it entirely, the last remaining bit for Supreme Court nominees. And that is how Trump was able to put on the bench on the Supreme Court Neil Gorsuch, Brett Kavanaugh, Amy Coney Barrett without 60 votes because of this process that started when Democrats opened the door and weakened the filibuster in 2013. And then those judges went on to form the Supreme Court that overturned Roe v. Wade. And yet still, it seems, the Democrats, at least Kamala Harris, haven't learned their lesson and still don't think in the long term. They still just think short-term, tunnel vision, what can I do right now without thinking of the long-term consequences. It's really alarming stuff, and it's so concerning to see an inability among our political leaders to think more than 2 steps ahead when it comes to undermining the checks and balances built into our system. I can't say I'm particularly surprised by the lack of foresight and wisdom that Kamala Harris is showing here, but I'm still disappointed by it nonetheless. What do you think? Let me know in the comments below.